The NOKAS Cash Depot Heist 2004, Norway, on Easter Monday. April 5, 2004, the peaceful Norwegian city of Stavanger became the scene of the country's most audacious robbery. In a brazen daylight assault that resembled a military operation, heavily armed criminals stormed the NOKAS Cash Depot in the heart of the city, firing over 113 rounds to breach bulletproof glass and engaging police in a fierce gun battle that claimed the life of police chief Arne, Sigve, Klungland, led by career criminal David Toska. The gang escaped with 57.4 million kroner, approximately $8 million, despite intelligence warnings that went unheeded. This is the story of meticulous planning, devastating violence, forensic breakthroughs, and how Norway's largest criminal investigation ultimately brought the perpetrators to justice. The heist. The morning of April 5, 2004, dawned cold and quiet in Stavanger, Norway's fourth-largest city. It was Easter Monday, a national holiday when most Norwegians were enjoying time with family, their minds far from work and worry. The streets of this peaceful coastal city were nearly deserted, the police station operating with a skeleton crew. It was the perfect day for what would become Norway's biggest and most audacious robbery. A military-style assault that would shatter the country's sense of security and leave one police officer dead in a hail of bullets. This is the story of the NOKAS Cash Depot Heist, a meticulously planned commando raid that saw heavily armed men storm a fortified facility in broad daylight, engage police in a fierce gun battle in the heart of the city, and escape with 57.4 million Norwegian kroner, equivalent to about $8 million. It's a story of criminal mastermind David Toska, devastating police intelligence failures, DNA evidence left burning at the police station's doorstep, and the largest criminal investigation in modern Norwegian history. The target NOKAS Cash Depot in central Stavanger. To understand this heist, you must first understand the target and why it represented such an irresistible prize to Norway's criminal underworld. The NOKAS Cash Depot, formerly known as Norsk Kontservice, was located at Klungland in the very heart of Stavanger, just steps away from the city's iconic cathedral. This was on some remote warehouse on the outskirts of town. This was a cash processing facility sitting in the middle of one of Norway's busiest commercial districts. NOKAS served as a critical node in Norway's financial infrastructure, handling cash distribution and counting services for banks across the region. On any given day, the facility held millions of kroner in circulated banknotes, processing cash deliveries, counting deposits, and preparing currency shipments for financial institutions throughout southwestern Norway. But on April 5, 2004, the depot held approximately 57 million kroner, a concentration of liquid assets that made it an exceptionally valuable target. The facility itself was housed in an older office building on Klungland, and this age would become a critical factor in both the planning and execution of the robbery. While the building had been retrofitted with modern security systems, bulletproof glass alarm systems, surveillance cameras, and controlled access points, the robbers believed they had identified a vulnerability: a window overlooking an interior courtyard that might not be as heavily fortified as the main entrances. The location's urban centrality was both an advantage and a disadvantage for potential robbers. On one hand, it meant rapid access via proximate roadways and multiple escape routes through the city's street network. On the other hand, it meant proximity to the Stavanger police headquarters, which was located less than 500 meters away on Logsevine Street. Any robbery attempt would trigger an immediate police response, meaning the operation would need to be executed with military precision and overwhelming force. But there was another factor that would make April 5, 2004, the perfect day for this heist: Easter Monday. This national holiday meant lighter operational staffing at the depot and, more critically, severe understaffing at the police station. The timing was unaccidental. It was the result of months of careful planning by a criminal mastermind who understood that the best time to strike was when security was weakest, but when law enforcement response would be slowest. The mastermind, David Toska, and his criminal evolution. The architect of the NOKAS robbery was a 28-year-old Oslo native named David Alexander Toska, a career criminal whose ambitions and sophistication far exceeded those of typical Norwegian criminals. Born in Bergen on September 18, 1975, Toska moved to Oslo in 1985 and grew up in the Alevel and Bielsen neighborhoods. His criminal career began before he turned 20, and by 2004, He had established himself as one of Norway's most prolific and dangerous robbers. Toska's early criminal activities were crude but showed flashes of the sophistication that would later define his operations. He was first arrested for a robbery in Elleville, where a car was driven through a shop window, a brazen attack that demonstrated his willingness to use overwhelming force to achieve his objectives. But it was a 1996 arrest that revealed the true scope of his criminal ambitions. Police, arresting him for carrying a loaded weapon in an Oslo bar, searched his home and discovered an MP5 submachine gun, explosives and tools specifically designed for committing robberies. This wasn't a small-time criminal dabbling in petty crime. This was someone building an arsenal and planning major operations. The discovery should have been a warning about what was to come, but Toska emerged from his punishment more determined and more sophisticated than before. Between 2000 and 2004, Toska orchestrated a series of increasingly ambitious robberies that would earn him the reputation as one of Scandinavia's most dangerous criminals. He was the mastermind behind the break-in at Norsk Medisinaldepot on November 19, 2000, a sophisticated theft of pharmaceuticals. Then came the safe deposit box robbery at Bryn on October 1, 2001, where his crew made off with approximately 20 million kroner in cash and valuables. This operation was particularly notable because a security employee, allegedly at the direction of police running an infiltration operation, fed Toska information, a controversial episode that would later raise questions about law enforcement tactics and entrapment. By October 27, 2003, Toska had graduated to commando-style operations with a daring robbery of Postens Brevsentril, Norway's postal mail center. This operation demonstrated many of the tactical elements that would later appear in the NOKAS heist: careful planning, overwhelming force, and precise timing. Each robbery was more ambitious than the last, and each success emboldened Toska to attempt something even bigger. The key to Toska's criminal success was his ability to assemble and lead teams of accomplices who could execute complex operations with military-style discipline. His crew consisted of former inmates he had met during previous incarcerations, school friends from his Oslo youth, and recent acquaintances from Norway's criminal underworld. These were random associates. Toska carefully selected individuals with specific skills and capabilities that would contribute to the operation's success. But Toska's greatest strength was his meticulous planning. Unlike impulsive criminals who acted on opportunity, Toska spent months studying targets, identifying vulnerabilities, and rehearsing every aspect of his operations. When he decided to target the NOKAS cash depot in Stavanger, he was already thinking several moves ahead, planning not just the robbery itself, but how to neutralize police response and ensure a clean escape. The planning phase: 5 months of preparation. The planning for the NOKAS robbery began in November 2003, when a contact described the Stavanger cash depot building to Toska and mentioned what appeared to be a blind spot in the building's security, a window overlooking an interior courtyard that might be vulnerable to a forced entry. This single piece of information became the seed from which an elaborate criminal conspiracy would grow. Toska, who was living in Oslo with his girlfriend and newborn son, recognized that pulling off a robbery in Stavanger, over 500 kilometers from his home territory, would require extensive on-site preparation. He couldn't simply drive down, hit the target, and drive back. He needed to establish a local base of operations, study the target's routines, plan escape routes, and coordinate a team of accomplices who would need to be in position for weeks before the actual robbery. To establish this base, Toska rented a flat in Skåne, a residential area of Stavanger, which would serve as the rendezvous point where he and his accomplices would prepare and dress for the raid. This safe house became the operational headquarters for the conspiracy, where weapons were stored, tactics were discussed, and the team could gather without attracting attention from neighbors or law enforcement. The planning process was extraordinarily thorough. Toska and his team conducted extensive surveillance of the NOKAS depot, studying the building's layout, security measures, employee routines, and cash delivery schedules. They observed which entrances were most heavily monitored, where security cameras were positioned, and how quickly guards responded to various situations. They timed armored car deliveries and noted patterns in when the depot held the largest amounts of cash. But Toska's planning extended far beyond the target itself. He understood that the robbery's success would depend not just on getting into the facility and securing the money, but on delaying police response long enough to complete the operation and escape. The depot's proximity to the police station, normally a deterrent to would-be robbers, became a specific challenge that required creative solutions. At the end of winter in 2004, the team conducted what amounted to a dress rehearsal for their escape. They tested the routes they would take after the raid using existing footpaths and cycle paths, some of them unfinished construction routes that wouldn't appear on standard maps. They timed these escape routes, identified potential bottlenecks where police might establish roadblocks, selected locations where they would switch vehicles to throw off pursuit. This kind of detailed preparation was unprecedented in Norwegian criminal history. The crew also acquired an impressive arsenal of military-grade weapons and equipment. Their weaponry included a G3 assault rifles, MP5 submachine guns, Kalashnikov automatic rifles, an M1 carbine, and a .45 ACP pistol. Much of this equipment was military property stolen from Madla military camp, a brazen theft that should have raised alarm bells about a major operation being planned. They also obtained bulletproof vests, tactical helmets, ski masks, gloves, and dark coveralls that would give them the appearance of a military or police special forces unit. The psychological impact of this equipment couldn't be overstated. The robbers weren't just arming themselves to threaten bank employees, they were preparing for sustained combat with law enforcement. The bulletproof vests and helmets would protect them from police gunfire, while the automatic weapons would give them overwhelming firepower superiority over officers armed with standard-issue handguns and revolvers. As April approached and Easter holiday schedules were published, Toska finalized the date for the operation: Monday, April 5, 2004, Easter Monday. The holiday would mean minimal police staffing and slower response times, giving his team the crucial extra minutes they would need to breach the facility, secure the cash, and escape before overwhelming police reinforcements could arrive. The intelligence failure when warnings went unheeded. One of the most troubling aspects of the NOKAS robbery is that it should never have happened. Norwegian police had intelligence warning that a major heist was being planned, possibly targeting the NOKAS depot, and that it would likely occur during the Easter holiday period. This intelligence came from multiple sources and should have triggered preventive action, but a combination of institutional failures, Easter holiday understaffing, and inadequate threat assessment allowed the robbery to proceed as planned. The warnings were remarkably specific. Police had received tips that specified the timing around Easter and identified the NOKAS depot as the probable target. This information had been obtained at least 2 days before the robbery, giving authorities time to implement heightened surveillance or deploy additional security at the facility. But no preventive measures were taken. Officer Arne Hammersmark would later give testimony revealing just how much intelligence police had received before the robbery. Potential getaway vehicles had been stolen in Hamar, including a Ford Expedition that matched the type of vehicle used in previous Toska operations. A Volvo XC allegedly linked to Kjell Alrik Schumann, one of Toska's known associates, had been observed in the Stavanger area. At the same time, several ATMs in central eastern Norway where Schumann was known to operate had been attacked. In what appeared to be either fundraising operations or diversionary tactics. Even more concerning, several key figures in Norway's criminal underworld had gone underground, disappeared from their usual haunts, and rumors suggested they had taken up residence in the Stavanger area. Security personnel at NOKAS had even observed possible surveillance of their office and transport vans in the weeks before the robbery. All of these indicators, viewed together, painted a clear picture of a major operation being planned. Yet on the morning of April 5, 2004, the NOKAS depot was operating with normal security, and the Stavanger police station was running with minimal Easter holiday staffing. That morning, a bulletin was finally issued warning that the NOKAS depot was a possible target. But by then, it was too late. The robbers were already in position, and the operation was minutes away from execution. The failure to act on this intelligence represented a catastrophic breakdown in threat assessment and insurgency communication. The various pieces of information existed in different parts of the law enforcement system, but were never properly collated and analyzed as a coherent threat. The Easter holiday timing, which should have prompted heightened vigilance, instead created staffing gaps that made police response even less effective than usual. This intelligence failure would haunt Norwegian law enforcement for years afterward and would drive comprehensive reforms in how threat information was shared, analyzed, and acted upon. But on Easter Monday 2004, these lessons had yet to be learned. And the price for that failure would be measured in millions of stolen kroner and one officer's life. Easter Monday morning, the final preparations. The early morning hours of April 5, 2004, were filled with quiet, methodical activity at the safe house in Skåne. David Toska and his accomplices, approximately 13 men in total, were making their final preparations for what would be the most audacious criminal operation in Norwegian history. At 3:30 a.m., while most of Stavanger slept, the operation began its first phase. 7 or 8 robbers were picked up from the townhouse in Skåne and driven to Oppmarshplassen, a grove near Tennisland about 13 kilometers from the NOKAS depot. This remote location would serve as their primary staging area, far enough from the target to avoid detection, but close enough to allow rapid deployment when the time came. The van that had transported the first group then returned to Skåne to retrieve the remaining men. But this second trip carried more than just people. The crew also loaded mattresses, bedding, and towels. These items were meant to be destroyed as part of an elaborate plan to eliminate DNA evidence that might link the crew members to the operation. These materials would later be doused in petrol and set alight outside the police station in what the robbers thought was a clever double play: delay police response and destroy genetic evidence simultaneously. At around 6:55 a.m., with dawn breaking over Stavanger, some of the robbers made a brief stop at Rosenberg Verft, a shipyard about 5 kilometers from the NOKAS depot. A police patrol was observed patrolling the streets in the area, and the crew paused to ensure they wouldn't encounter law enforcement while moving into position. This caution was characteristic of Toska's careful planning. Every contingency had been considered, every risk assessed and mitigated where possible. By 7 a.m., vehicles were spotted on CCTV moving through Stavanger's streets. A Ford Expedition with registration BP 50471 was caught on camera on Logsvine Street. At this point, the robbery team was scattered across multiple vehicles and positions, each element preparing to execute their specific role in the coordinated assault that was now less than an hour away. Around 7:45 a.m., the robbers gathered at their final staging area, a small location just 200 meters from the NOKAS building. Here, they conducted final weapons checks, synchronized watches, and reviewed their assignments one last time. Each man knew his role. Some would assault the building and secure the cash, others would establish perimeter security around at Cathedral Square to prevent police from approaching, and still others would execute the diversionary attack on the police station that would buy them precious extra minutes. The crew donned their tactical equipment, bulletproof vests that would stop handgun rounds, helmets to protect against headshots, ski masks to conceal their identities, gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints, and dark coveralls that gave them a paramilitary appearance. They loaded their automatic weapons, chambered rounds, and prepared for what they knew could become a sustained gun battle with law enforcement. At approximately 7:58 a.m., with all elements in position and the plan ready to execute, David Toska gave the order. The NOKAS robbery months in the planning, involving more than a dozen criminals and military-grade equipment, was about to begin. 8 a.m., the assault begins. At exactly 8 a.m., the carefully choreographed military-style assault began with a diversionary attack designed to cripple police response. Johnny then drove a white Volvo truck down the ramp leading to the Stavanger police station parking exit on Logsvine Street. In a display of brazen audacity, he parked the truck directly in front of the garage exit, blocking the only vehicle egress from the police station. Then he set the truck on fire. The burning truck created an immediate crisis at the police station. Not only did it physically block police vehicles from responding to any calls, but the fire and thick smoke created confusion and drew police personnel's attention. But then Drupp wasn't finished. He threw tear gas canisters at the front entrance of the police station, creating even more chaos and forcing officers to deal with multiple simultaneous emergencies. As a final touch, spike strips were spread across nearby roads to puncture the tires of any police vehicles that might find alternate routes from the station. While the police station descended into controlled chaos, The main assault force was moving into position at the NOKAS depot. At 8:01 a.m., a Range Rover, with registration AX 72271, parked directly outside the cash depot on Kongens. Seconds later, a Saab parked near St. Mary's Church, which stood adjacent to the Cathedral Square. The positioning was precise. These vehicles would serve as both assault platforms and getaway cars. At 8:02 a.m., the doors of the Range Rover opened, and heavily armed gunmen dressed in dark suits, gas masks, and tactical helmets emerged. To witnesses, they looked like police special forces or military operators, exactly the impression they intended to create. The sight of what appeared to be an elite tactical unit deploying in central Stavanger in broad daylight was so surreal that some bystanders initially believed they were witnessing a police operation or training exercise. The gunmen immediately took tactical positions around Cathedral Square, establishing a security perimeter that would cover the escape route once the robbery was complete. Their automatic weapons were held at the ready, and their body language communicated professional military training. This wasn't a gang of desperate criminals. This was an organized, disciplined unit executing a rehearsed operation. The assault team moved quickly toward the NOKAS building, making their way through a side entrance that led to the interior courtyard they had identified during months of surveillance. This was the moment when Toska's planning would be tested against reality. The window overlooking the courtyard was supposed to be the vulnerability, the weak point through which they could breach the facility and avoid the building's more heavily secured main entrances. They approached the window armed with sledgehammers and a battering ram. The plan called for a quick, forceful breach, smash the window, enter the facility, overwhelm the employees, secure the cash, and exit within 8 minutes. Speed and violence of action were essential to success. But as the first blows from the sledgehammer struck the window, the robbers encountered their first major problem. The window wasn't weak, it was bulletproof. The breach minus 113 shots to break through. The discovery that the supposedly vulnerable window was actually reinforced with bulletproof glass created an immediate crisis for the robbery team. Their 8-minute timeline was already ticking, and they hadn't even gotten inside the building yet. Each passing second increased the likelihood that police would arrive in force, turning the robbery into a potential disaster. Inside the NOKAS depot, employees heard the thunderous impacts of sledgehammers and the battering rams striking the bulletproof glass. The alarm system was triggered at approximately 8:03 a.m., sending automatic alerts to the Stavanger police station and NOKAS security. The silent alarm meant that police were now aware something was happening at the depot, though the burning truck and tear gas at their own station would delay their response. The NOKAS employees, trained for exactly this scenario, didn't wait to see what would happen next. They immediately began evacuating the building, using emergency exits and following procedures designed to get personnel away from armed robbers. Their priority wasn't protecting the cash. NOKAS was insured, and no amount of money was worth an employee's life. Their priority was getting out alive. Outside at the window, the battering ram wasn't working. Sledgehammer blows were leaving marks, but not breaking through. David Toska, the operational commander on scene, realized they needed more drastic measures. He raised his AK-47 and fired multiple rounds directly into the bulletproof glass. The distinctive crack of automatic weapons fire echoed through central Stavanger, a sound so alien to this peaceful Norwegian city that it seemed to come from another world entirely. But even Toska's AK-47 wasn't penetrating the glass effectively. The rounds created spiderweb cracks and weakened the material, but the window held. Toska turned to Kjell Alrik Schumann, who was armed with an AG-3 automatic rifle, one of the most powerful weapons in their arsenal, firing full-power 7.62mm NATO rounds that could punch through most barriers. "Shoot the window," Toska ordered. Schumann, who would later admit to being the one who fired the fatal shot that killed the police officer, unleashed rapid automatic fire at the bulletproof glass. The AG-3 roared, emptying magazine after magazine into the window. The other robbers ducked and covered their ears as Schumann's rifle created a deafening cacophony in the enclosed courtyard. Brass shell casings rained down on the cobblestones as he fired burst after burst. The fusillade was terrifying in its intensity. In total, 113 shots were fired at the window with automatic weapons, an extraordinary volume of fire for what was supposed to be a quick surgical operation. The sound of sustained automatic weapons fire in central Stavanger was creating panic throughout the city center. Residents and shopkeepers who heard the gunfire initially thought it was construction noise or some kind of accident. But as the firing continued, the unmistakable reality set in. Someone was shooting in the heart of their city. Finally, after what must have felt like an eternity to the sweating, adrenaline-fueled robbers, the bulletproof glass gave way. The window shattered, creating an opening large enough for the assault team to enter. By this time, most of the NOKAS employees had successfully evacuated the building. But approximately 7 gunmen finally gained access to the ground floor of the depot. Inside, the facility was in chaos. The alarm was blaring, papers and debris scattered by the gunfire littered the floor, and the acrid smell of gun smoke filled the air. But the robbers had trained for this chaos. They moved methodically through the facility, weapons at the ready, clearing rooms and searching for the vault where the cash was stored. The delay caused by the bulletproof glass window had cost them precious minutes. Nearly 5 minutes of their 8-minute window was already gone, and they still hadn't secured any money. But worse than the lost time, the sustained gunfire and the time it took to breach the facility meant that police response was now imminent. The element of surprise was gone, and the robbery team would soon be fighting for their lives as well as their freedom. Cathedral Square, the police response, and gun battle. While the assault team was inside the NOKAS depot, desperately trying to secure the cash and prepare for escape, the perimeter security team positioned around Cathedral Square spotted the first police response. At approximately 8:05 a.m., the first patrol car appeared on the scene, driven by officers who had heard the reports of automatic weapons fire in the city center and were responding to investigate. What these officers encountered was unlike anything in their training or experience. As their patrol car approached Cathedral Square, they found themselves facing heavily armed men in tactical gear who immediately opened fire. The officers, armed only with standard-issue revolvers, were catastrophically outgunned. The difference between a service revolver and an automatic rifle in such an encounter isn't just about firepower, it's about the ability to suppress and maneuver. The robbers could lay down sustained fire that forced police to take cover, while the officers' revolvers, even if they could hit their targets, were ineffective against the robbers' body armor. Officer Fred Sherling, who was in civilian clothing and attempting to keep bystanders from straying near the gunman, suddenly came face-to-face with Kjell Ulrik Schumann. Schumann, his AG-3 assault rifle still smoking from the ammunition he'd expended breaching the window, pointed the weapon directly at Sherling and demanded, "Who are you?" Sherling immediately raised his hands, recognizing the hopelessness of his situation. Schumann ordered him to lie on the ground, and Sherling complied, probably saving his own life in the process. The encounter demonstrated the robbers' willingness to use lethal force against police officers, and their tactical discipline in maintaining control of the situation even as events spiraled out of their planned timeline. Around Cathedral Square, a fierce gun battle erupted. Johnny Then Drupp, who had set fire to the truck at the police station and was now providing perimeter security, was engaged by Sergeant Eric Hyland. In the exchange of gunfire, Then Drupp took a bullet to the right thigh from Hyland's weapon. Hyland would fire a total of 17 shots during this standoff, while his colleague Thesson fired 3 shots. These were precisely aimed shots from officers with revolvers trying to hit moving targets who were wearing body armor and returning sustained automatic fire in almost impossible tactical situation. A passing cyclist, Olav Arne Hopstall, was suddenly caught in the crossfire. One of the gunmen near Then Drupp ordered him to the ground at gunpoint. Hopstall, initially confused by the tactical gear and professional appearance of the men, thought they were police marksmen conducting an operation. Only later would he realize he had been held at gunpoint by the robbers themselves. This confusion was exactly what the robbers had counted on. Their military-style equipment and tactical demeanor made it difficult for civilians to immediately identify them as criminals. Inside the NOKAS building, the assault team had finally located and accessed the cash vault. They began frantically loading money into duffel bags, but the delay caused by the bulletproof glass breach meant they had far less time than planned. The sound of gunfire outside told them that police had arrived and that their window for escape was rapidly closing. At approximately 8:15 a.m., the assault team emerged from the NOKAS building carrying duffel bags heavy with millions of kroner in cash. Kjell Ulrik Schumann exited the building and immediately assessed the tactical situation around Cathedral Square. Police vehicles were arriving from multiple directions, and the sound of sirens indicated that more reinforcements were converging on the area. Schumann spotted a police car outside the Maritime Hotel on King Street. Inside was Police Chief Arne Sigve Klungland, a 53-year-old officer responding to the emergency. Klungland was attempting to position his vehicle to block one of the robbers' escape routes. But as he maneuvered, he found his vehicle trapped, due to a bus that had stopped behind him. At 8:17 a.m., Keo Alrik Schumann raised his AG-3 assault rifle and fired at Klungland's police car. The full-power rifle rounds punched through the vehicle's door and windows as if they were paper. One round struck Klungland in the head and he died shortly afterward. Police Lieutenant Arne Sigve Klungland would become the only fatality of the NOKAS robbery, a devastating loss for his family, the police force, and all of Norway. The killing of a police officer marked this robbery as something beyond property crime. It was now a murder investigation, and the perpetrators would face the full weight of Norwegian justice if they were ever caught. The escape 20 minutes of chaos. With their leader dead and facing overwhelming firepower, the responding police officers were forced into defensive positions. The robbers used this tactical advantage to mount their escape, moving quickly to their waiting vehicles even as gunfire continued to echo through the streets of Stavanger. At 8:19 a.m., the gunmen began their escape from Cathedral Square in 3 vehicles: the Range Rover, a Saab, and a Ford Expedition. David Toska was in the Ford, directing the escape operation even as the crew came under continued police fire. The scene was one of utter chaos: automatic weapons fire, sirens, screaming civilians running for cover, and the acrid smell of gunpowder hanging in the spring air. But the escape didn't go smoothly. In the confusion and adrenaline of the moment, the Range Rover collided with the Saab, breaking the Range Rover's bumper and potentially hampering their ability to flee quickly. Even worse, one of the robbers in one of the vehicles, a man named Halimi, received a bullet to the head during the escape. The injury wasn't immediately fatal, but it demonstrated that the Norwegian police, despite being outgunned, were fighting back effectively with the limited weapons they had. The 3 getaway cars raced through Stavanger streets, heading northwest toward the predetermined vehicle exchange site in Sarmarka. This was the route they had rehearsed in late winter, using footpaths and cycle paths that would be difficult for police vehicles to follow. The plan called for them to drive to a remote location where additional vehicles were waiting, transfer the cash and personnel, burn the getaway cars to destroy forensic evidence, and then scatter in multiple directions to make pursuit impossible. At approximately 8:25 a.m., the 3 getaway cars reached the exchange site near Sarmarka. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, despite the chaos they'd just experienced. They transferred the heavy duffel bags filled with cash to the waiting vehicles, along with any equipment they wanted to preserve. At 8:30 a.m., the 3 getaway cars were set on fire. The flames consumed the vehicles, destroying fingerprints, DNA evidence, and any other forensic material that might have allowed police to identify individual participants. The crew then escaped in the waiting vehicles, following pre-planned routes that would take them in different directions away from Stavanger. The entire operation, from the burning truck at the police station to the final escape from the vehicle exchange site, had lasted approximately 30 minutes. In that half hour, the robbers had fired hundreds of rounds of ammunition, killed a police officer, stolen 57.4 million kroner, and disappeared into the Norwegian countryside. For the police officers standing amid the chaos of Cathedral Square, surveying the bullet-scarred buildings and shattered glass and knowing one of their own lay dead, the realization was overwhelming. They had just witnessed the biggest robbery in Norwegian history, and the criminals had gotten away. The investigation. In the immediate aftermath of the robbery, Norwegian law enforcement mobilized what would become the most extensive criminal investigation in the country's modern history. The NOKAS robbery had not only resulted in massive financial losses and the death of a police officer, but it had also revealed profound weaknesses in police preparedness and response capabilities. The investigation would need to identify and apprehend the perpetrators, recover the stolen money, and provide answers about how such an audacious crime had been allowed to occur. The crime scene processing began immediately and was extraordinarily complex. Investigators had to collect and analyze evidence from multiple locations: the NOKAS depot itself, Cathedral Square where the gun battle occurred, the police station where the diversionary truck had been burned, and eventually the vehicle exchange site in Sarmarka where the getaway cars had been torched. The Cathedral Square and around the NOKAS building, forensic teams collected hundreds of spent shell casings from the various weapons used during the robbery and shootout. Ballistics experts would analyze these casings and any recovered bullets to determine exactly how many weapons had been used and potentially match them to weapons used in previous crimes. The 113 shots fired to breach the bulletproof window alone represented an extraordinary amount of ballistic evidence. The breakthrough in the investigation came from an ironic twist. The robbers' attempt to destroy DNA evidence actually provided investigators with their most valuable forensic leads. Remember those mattresses, bedding, and towels that the crew had brought from their safe house in Skåne? These items, which the robbers intended to burn to destroy any genetic evidence, had been doused with petrol and set alight in the burning truck outside the police station. However, the fire didn't completely consume these materials. When firefighters extinguished the blaze and investigators examined the truck's cargo, they found partially burned towels and mattresses that still contained recoverable DNA evidence. The robbers, in their attempt to destroy evidence and delay police response with a single action, actually delivered proof of their identities directly to the police station's front door. DNA extracted from these materials was run through Norway's criminal database and began producing matches to known criminals with previous robbery convictions. The genetic evidence would become crucial in identifying specific participants in the robbery and providing forensic proof that could withstand courtroom scrutiny. Investigators also focused on the weapons and military equipment used in the robbery. The fact that so much of this equipment had been stolen from Madla military camp suggested insider knowledge or connections to individuals with access to military bases. Tracing the stolen military property became a priority, both to identify the theft's source and to potentially link specific individuals to the robbery. The vehicle investigation was equally important. The stolen Ford Expedition and other vehicles used in the robbery were traced through their theft reports and CCTV footage showing them in the Stavanger area before the robbery. Investigators worked to build a timeline of when these vehicles were stolen, where they had been kept, and who might have had access to them. Building the case, intelligence, surveillance, and breakthroughs. As the investigation progressed, several lines of inquiry began to converge on a common set of suspects. The criminal database matches from the DNA evidence provided names, and these names were cross-referenced with the intelligence warnings that police had received before the robbery. Investigators realized with frustration that they had, in some cases, known to watch for exactly these individuals, but had failed to act on that intelligence in time to prevent the robbery. David Toska quickly emerged as the prime suspect for the role of mastermind and operational commander. His previous robberies demonstrated the kind of sophisticated planning and military-style execution that characterized the NOKAS heist. The safe deposit box robbery at Bryn in 2001 and the commando-style robbery of Postens Brev Central in 2003 showed a clear pattern of escalation and increasing ambition that pointed directly toward NOKAS as Toska's next target. Kjell Alrik Schumann, whose DNA was found on the burned materials and who was known to associate with Toska, became a primary suspect for direct participation in the assault. Investigators believed, based on witness statements and ballistic evidence, that Schumann was likely the shooter who killed Police Chief Klungland. His AG-3 assault rifle had fired the hundreds of rounds that breached the bulletproof glass, and witness testimony from officers at the scene placed him in the positions where the fatal shots were fired. The safe house in Skåne became a critical focus of the investigation. Police obtained search warrants and executed a comprehensive forensic examination of the rented flat. The evidence they collected, fibers, DNA, fingerprints, and trace materials, provided crucial links between the suspects and the crime. Investigators were able to place specific individuals at the safe house during the weeks leading up to the robbery, establishing their conspiracy and planning activities. Investigators also conducted extensive interviews with potential witnesses who might have seen suspicious activity in the days and weeks before the robbery. Neighbors near the Skåne safe house were questioned about unusual comings and goings. Employees at businesses near the NOKAS depot were interviewed about people conducting surveillance of the facility. Gas station attendants were shown photographs of suspects and asked if they remembered selling fuel or seeing the stolen vehicles. The financial investigation tracked the stolen 57.4 million kroner through Norway's banking system and underground economy. Investigators knew that laundering such a large amount of cash would require sophisticated networks and multiple transactions. They monitored known money launderers, watched for sudden unexplained wealth among suspects and their associates, and worked with international law enforcement agencies to track potential cross-border money movements. Telecommunications analysis provided another layer of evidence. Phone records for the suspects showed patterns of communication in the weeks before the robbery that suggested coordination and planning. Cell tower data placed specific phones in, therefore, their users in Stavanger during the critical period when final surveillance and preparations were being conducted. While phone records alone couldn't prove criminal activity, they corroborated other evidence and helped establish timelines and relationships among the conspirators. The arrests bringing the perpetrators to justice. The arrests began to occur in the months following the robbery as investigators built comprehensive cases against each suspect. The process was methodical and deliberate, with prosecutors ensuring they had sufficient evidence to secure convictions before making arrests that would trigger legal timelines and defense preparations. David Toska was arrested on June 30, 2004, less than 3 months after the robbery. His capture represented a major victory for the investigation team, removing from circulation one of Norway's most dangerous and prolific criminals. The evidence against Toska was substantial. DNA from the burned materials placed him at the scene. Witness testimony from accomplices who agreed to cooperate identified him as the mastermind, and his pattern of previous robberies demonstrated both capability and motive. Kjell Alrik Schumann was arrested separately and faced the most serious charges of all the conspirators. As the suspected shooter who killed Police Chief Klungland, he faced murder charges in addition to robbery and weapons offenses. Schumann would later admit to being the shooter, though he claimed the killing was not intentional but occurred during the chaos of the gun battle. This admission, while acknowledging responsibility, was an attempt to argue for a lesser charge than premeditated murder. Over the following months, additional members of the robbery crew were identified and arrested. Johnny Vendrup, who drove the burning truck to the police station and was wounded during the shootout, was arrested and charged with his role in the conspiracy. The various drivers, lookouts, and support personnel who had played smaller but crucial roles in the operation were also tracked down and charged appropriately based on their level of participation. The cooperation of some lower-level participants proved crucial in securing convictions against the operation's leadership. Facing significant prison time and confronted with DNA and other forensic evidence, several conspirators agreed to testify against their co-defendants in exchange for reduced sentences. These insider accounts provided the detailed timeline of planning and execution that prosecutors needed to paint a complete picture of the conspiracy for the courts. The arrests sent shockwaves through Norway's criminal underworld. The NOKAS robbery had been viewed as a potentially perfect crime, carefully planned, militarily executed, and initially successful in its objectives. The fact that Norwegian law enforcement had systematically identified and arrested most of the participants demonstrated that even sophisticated criminal operations left evidence that could be used to bring perpetrators to justice. The trial's justice for Officer Klungland. The trials of the NOKAS robbers began in 2005 and attracted massive media attention throughout Norway. The proceedings provided the first comprehensive public accounting of how the robbery was planned and executed, and gave Norwegians insight into the criminal sophistication that had made such an audacious crime possible. David Toska's trial revealed the extent of his criminal empire and the systematic way he had orchestrated not just the NOKAS robbery, but multiple previous crimes. Prosecutors presented evidence of his previous convictions, his escalating pattern of criminal activity, and the meticulous planning that characterized his operations. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA placing him at the scene, testimony from accomplices detailing his leadership role, and documentation of his rental of the Skinehallen safe house and coordination of logistics. On February 9, 2006, Toska was convicted of aggravated robbery and sentenced to 21 years in prison, the maximum sentence under Norwegian law at the time. The length of the sentence reflected both the severity of the crime and Toska's extensive criminal history. The court found that he had been the mastermind and operational commander of the robbery, making him criminally responsible for all aspects of the operation, including the death of Officer Klungland, even though he had not personally fired the fatal shot. Kjell Alrik Schumann faced separate murder charges for the killing of Police Chief Klungland. His trial was particularly emotional, with Klungland's family present to witness the proceedings and seek justice for their loss. A Schumann admitted to being the shooter, but argued that the killing occurred in the chaos of the gun battle and was not premeditated murder. The prosecution argued that by bringing military-grade weapons to the robbery and firing at police officers, Schumann had demonstrated a willingness to kill that made him guilty of murder regardless of whether that specific shot was planned. The court ultimately convicted Schumann of murder and robbery offenses. He was sentenced to 21 years in prison, matching Toska's sentence. The verdict brought some measure of closure to Klungland's family, though no sentence could truly compensate for their loss. Johnny Then Drup, who set fire to the truck at the police station and was wounded during the shootout, received a lengthy prison sentence for his role in the conspiracy. Despite being shot during the operation, he had continued to fulfill his role in the robbery team, demonstrating commitment to the criminal enterprise that prosecutors argued warranted significant punishment. Additional crew members received sentences ranging from several years to over a decade. Depending on their level of participation in criminal history, the courts ensured that everyone involved in the planning and execution of the robbery faced significant consequences for their actions. The trials also addressed the intelligence failures that had allowed the robbery to proceed despite warnings. Police officials testified about the information they had received and the decisions made regarding staffing and security during the Easter holiday period. While no criminal charges were brought against law enforcement personnel for these failures, the testimony led to administrative reviews and policy changes designed to prevent similar breakdowns in the future. The money, recovery, and disposition. One of the most challenging aspects of the investigation and prosecution was the recovery of the stolen 57.4 million kroner. Despite the successful arrest and conviction of most of the robbery's participants, the vast majority of the stolen money was never recovered. Investigators traced portions of the stolen cash through various channels. Some money was found hidden in locations connected to the arrested conspirators' safe deposit boxes, hidden compartments in vehicles, and concealed locations in homes and storage units. But these recoveries represented only a small fraction of the total amount stolen. The bulk of the money appears to have been laundered through underground financial networks. It's converted into other assets, or simply hidden so effectively that investigators could never locate it. The longer the gap between the robbery and the arrests, the more time the conspirators and their associates had to move and conceal the proceeds. Some conspirators who agreed to cooperate with investigators provided information about the money's disposition, revealing how it had been divided among the participants and what had been done with individual shares. These accounts helped investigators understand the financial networks that had facilitated the laundering operation, but didn't lead to significant additional recoveries. NOKAS, like all cash handling companies, carried insurance that covered losses from robberies. The insurance company ultimately bore most of the financial cost of the theft, though they pursued civil litigation against the convicted robbers seeking restitution. These civil judgments, while legally valid, were largely symbolic. Imprisoned robbers had limited ability to pay significant restitution, and assets that could be seized had generally been concealed or dissipated. The failure to recover most of the stolen money remains one of the frustrating aspects of the case. While justice was served through the criminal convictions, the fact that the conspirators or their associates still have access to tens of millions of kroner in stolen money means that, in some sense, the crime remains profitable despite the perpetrator's imprisonment. The reforms how Norway changed after NOKAS. The NOKAS robbery prompted comprehensive reforms in Norwegian law enforcement, security protocols, and threat assessment procedures. The intelligence failures that allowed the robbery to proceed despite specific warnings became a catalyst for fundamental changes in how police collect, analyze, and act on threat information. Police departments across Norway reviewed and upgraded their weapons and equipment. The sight of officers with revolvers facing criminals with automatic rifles and body armor revealed a critical tactical gap that needed to be closed. Norwegian police began carrying more powerful weapons and received enhanced training in responding to high-threat situations. Specialized response teams were expanded and given better equipment to handle scenarios like the NOKAS robbery. The intelligence sharing systems between different law enforcement agencies were completely overhauled. The failure to properly collate and analyze the various warning signs before the robbery revealed that Norwegian law enforcement lacked effective mechanisms for combining information from multiple sources into actionable intelligence. New protocols were established requiring better communication and coordination between local police. national agencies, and intelligence services. Cash handling companies like NOKAS implemented enhanced security measures at their facilities. The bulletproof glass that delayed but did prevent the robbery's success prompted industry-wide reviews of physical security. New facilities were designed with hardened architecture specifically intended to resist military-style assaults. Security protocols were tightened, surveillance systems upgraded, and employee training programs enhanced. The legal system also evolved in response to the NOKAS robbery. Norway began examining whether its maximum prison sentences were adequate for the most serious crimes. While Toska and Schumann received the maximum 21-year sentences available at the time, some observers argued that the severity of their crimes, particularly the murder of a police officer, warranted even longer terms of imprisonment. Perhaps most significantly, the NOKAS robbery changed Norwegian society's perception of its own safety and security. Norway had long prided itself on being a peaceful nation, with low crime rates and an unarmed police force. The sight of military-style warfare in the heart of Stavanger, broadcast live on television, shattered that perception. Norwegians were forced to confront the reality that even their peaceful society was vulnerable to determined criminals with sophisticated planning and military-grade weapons. The legacy of Norway's biggest robbery, the NOKAS cash depot heist of April 5, 2004, remains. Norway's biggest and most infamous robbery, a meticulously planned military-style assault that saw heavily armed criminals steal 57.4 million kroner and kill a police officer in a brazen daylight raid. The crime shook Norwegian society to its core and exposed critical vulnerabilities in the country's law enforcement and security infrastructure. David Toska, the mastermind behind the operation, demonstrated criminal sophistication that was unprecedented in Norwegian crime. His 5 months of careful planning, coordination of more than a dozen accomplices, acquisition of military-grade weapons, and execution of a complex multi-phase operation showed what a determined and intelligent criminal could achieve when applying military-style planning to criminal objectives. The successful investigation and prosecution of most of the conspirators demonstrated that even sophisticated criminal operations leave evidence that can be used to bring perpetrators to justice. The DNA recovered from the partially burned mattresses and towels, combined with witness testimony, telecommunications analysis, and traditional investigative work, provided prosecutors with the evidence needed to secure multiple convictions and long prison sentences. But the NOKAS robbery also revealed painful truths about intelligence failures and institutional weaknesses. The specific warnings that police received before the robbery should have prevented it from occurring, or at least prompted enhanced security that might have deterred the attempt. The fact that these warnings went unheeded represents a tragic failure that cost Police Chief Arne Sigve Klungland his life and traumatized an entire nation. Today, more than 2 decades after the OKA's robbery, its impact continues to influence Norwegian law enforcement, security protocols, and criminal justice policy. The reforms implemented in its aftermath have made Norway better prepared to prevent and respond to major criminal operations. The enhanced weapons and training given to police officers mean they are no longer catastrophically outgunned when facing determined criminals. The improved intelligence sharing and threat assessment procedures make it less likely that specific warnings about major crimes will go unheeded. For the family and colleagues of Police Chief Klungland, no amount of reforms or convictions can truly compensate for their loss. His death stands as a reminder of the risks that law enforcement officers face when confronting armed criminals, and the debt that society owes to those who put themselves in harm's way to protect others. The NOKAS robbery also serves as a case study in the limitations of even successful criminal operations. While the robbers initially achieved their objective of stealing millions of kroner, most of them ended up in prison serving long sentences. The money, while providing temporary wealth, came at the cost of freedom, reputation, and in some cases, decades of their lives behind bars. The crime that seemed so sophisticated and successful in its execution ultimately destroyed the lives of those who committed it. As for the missing money, the tens of millions of kroner that were never recovered, it remains somewhere in Norway or beyond. A hidden fortune that represents both the robbery's initial success and the ultimate futility of the enterprise. Some of that money may have been spent over the years. Some may still be hidden waiting for the day when the imprisoned conspirators are released, and some may never be found. The NOKAS robbery stands as a watershed moment in Norwegian criminal history, the day when a peaceful nation discovered that it was not immune to the kind of violent, sophisticated crime that had long afflicted other societies. The lessons learned from that Easter Monday in 2004 continued to shape how Norway prepares for and responds to major crimes, ensuring that while the country cannot prevent all criminal activity, it is better equipped to detect, respond to, and prosecute those who would threaten its peace and security. Subscribe for this and many more stories.